There are options for martial characters in TTRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. This is important because many players and dungeon masters and game masters indicate a lack of options with martial characters. And when I say martial characters, I'm talking about those that don't really use magic in combat. Fighters, rogues, paladins, kind of mostly, and classes such as those. These are classes who rely on maneuverability and weapon attacks to be able to do damage and be effective in combat. And if you watch many of the character builds on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, you can find some really interesting things to do. One of the other issues is that those characters that are built to be effective in combat often become one-trick ponies. They find one or two ways to use and maximize their capabilities to be efficient and effective in combat. I put up the Tome of Battle Book of Nine Swords behind me because who remembers this book? Played since Second Edition. I loved Third Edition and the D20 system for what it did, providing so many different options, and this was one of the options that came out, and it was an option. It wasn't part of the main book. Essentially, what it did was it brought martial arts into Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not talking about the monk and Asian-style martial arts. I'm talking about different combat styles that would fit with different classes. The downside was you needed to pick specific classes to be able to benefit from these. There were also some feats that would allow characters who weren't one of these classes to at least have access to some of this. This is something that somewhat reminds me of 7th Sea, where every character type had its own kind of national martial art. They all fought in a different way. And for those who are into martial arts, that makes a lot of sense. For those who aren't, you might consider the Jedi and the different schools of lightsaber battles. Not too long ago, I found and I spoke about Level Up Advanced 5e from EN Publishing. One of the things I really liked about this was that it took those martial-based classes and gave them all maneuvers to put them on a level with spellcasters, wherein they had lots of different options and they could customize the options per character as to how they wanted to fight and maximize and be efficient in combat. The downside of this, of course, is it requires more forethought, more tinkering, more math, more keeping track of things, so it does add a distinct layer of complexity to gameplay. But for those familiar with games like Pathfinder, especially Pathfinder Second Edition, or Rollmaster, or GURPS, the options and complexity are an option. Many people relish in those kinds of fiddly bits of gamification. This product came out in 2006. It's almost 20 years old. Some people have made a rendition of it. Some people have made a port of it into other and newer systems, and they've had some, albeit limited, success. The reason for that is the subset of players within the TTRPG community who want something like this is relatively small, I believe. I haven't done a survey, but in my own discussions, replies to other posts and videos, I would say, and I'm working with a limited basis here, there's a lot of people who want this, but not nearly as many as people who don't. And when I look at it, and I'm looking at Pathfinder Second Edition and tweaking things, or some variation of Dungeons and Dragons and tweaking things, I definitely want something like this, but I think I want something more like Level Up Advanced 5e, because I want something available to all characters to have that option. I don't want people to have to pick a specific class, although class or classes that do specialize in the maneuvers should definitely be an option as well if that's going to be there. And I understand that some players are going to like this, and you're going to have the right table. And I believe if you run a table with mixed feelings on this, where some players really like it and some don't, so some take it and some don't, you are going to end up with an unbalanced table. Those players whose characters have this sort of thing are going to have a specific edge. So the question then becomes, what do you offer the players who don't want this? Because the reality is the edge comes from added complexity. I understand games of infinite minutia are not for everybody, but some people really enjoy them. Can you have a mixed table? And if so, how? Until I see you again, remember to be well, be safe, and be awesome, both to yourself and one another.